You know the feeling, the relentless, dizzying churn of daily life, the quiet, nagging anxiety that if you stop moving, even for a single second, you are going to fall behind. We treat perpetual motion as a virtue. Keep grinding, keep iterating, keep busy. But Nasir Khusrow invites us to consider a different metric, that the more we move, the further we drift from ourselves, and that stillness provides the clarity motion obscures. To understand why, we look to 11th century Persia. In his text, the al-Ikhwan, Khusraw laid out a metaphysical map of reality that addresses this modern exhaustion. Khusraw argued that reality rests on two pillars. The first is the material realm. He called it nature, and its defining characteristic is that it never stops moving. It is governed by instability, friction, and eventual decay. Opposing this is the universal intellect. Unlike nature, the intellect is defined by profound stillness. It doesn't move because it is already complete. It represents eternal truth and perfection. The architecture of the universe, then, is a division between the anxiety of motion and the peace of stillness. And right in the middle of these two opposing forces is you, specifically your soul. Khusraw viewed the human soul as an entity suspended between the pull of moving nature and the calm of the still intellect. When we lean downward into the material world, attaching our worth to physical things, we inherit their properties. The soul becomes entangled in constant change, leading to a state of exhaustion and anxiety. But if the soul turns toward the intellect, it begins to absorb that permanence. It detaches from the chaos and finds a state of completeness and peace. Khusraw's warning is that our ultimate internal state depends on which dimensional gravity we choose to surrender to. 2 centuries later, this concept of a soul in exile became the core of Jalal al-Din Rumi's masterpiece, the Mathnawi. Rumi opens his epic by describing a reed flute weeping because it was cut from its original silent reed bed. It represents the human soul, aching because it has been separated from its still source. Rumi maps out a path back through an evolutionary ascent. He notes that we died as minerals to become plants, as plants to become animals, and finally, animals to become human. In this framework, the physical end of life is not a loss, but the soul shedding its heavy, moving attachments to ascend closer to permanent stillness. If we cross the Mediterranean to ancient Greece, we find a similar dualism in Plato's allegory of the cave. The imagery maps closely. Plato's prisoners are captivated by flickering, constantly moving shadows, matching the transient chaos of Khusraw's nature. To find reality, they must turn away from that movement toward the sunlit realm of forms, a domain of unchanging, permanent stillness. A few centuries later, Plotinus and the Neoplatonists taught that the goal of human life is to purify the soul of its material matter, allowing it to return to the quiet of what they called the One. Even in the 20th century, the philosopher Martin Heidegger warned about losing our authentic selves to the busy, superficial chatter of the crowd, what he called the they. Across millennia, these thinkers independently reached a shared conclusion that getting swept up in the restless momentum of the crowd destroys the capacity for a focused, meaningful existence. In the East, the Buddhist concept of samsara perfectly echoes this definition of suffering. In Sanskrit, samsara literally translates to continuous movement. To escape this churning wheel, a practitioner seeks nirvana. This is not a physical place, but a state of being, the cessation of all craving and internal friction. Similarly, Taoism looks at the exhausting chaos of the material world, the 10,000 things, and offers the practice of Wu Wei. This is action anchored entirely by an unshakable inner quiet. From 11th century Persia to ancient Athens and classical China, these traditions converge on a single observation, that the frantic momentum of the material world is a primary source of human unrest. These ideas were developed long before we began housing our collective memory in server racks and engineering global systems designed to harvest attention. Today, our digital environment weaponizes our soul's vulnerability to nature. The 24-hour news cycle and algorithmic feeds push fleeting outrage and shifting trends, ensuring our minds remain in constant motion. We pay a psychological toll when we anchor our self-worth to things that are destined to decay. Relying on digital metrics or shifting public opinions for happiness is the definition of attaching yourself to the chaotic sphere. In our current reality, cultivating intellectual stillness is no longer just a philosophical exercise. It is a tool for psychological survival. If exploring the hidden architecture of the mind is something you value, take a moment to subscribe and leave a comment below. It helps us keep making these deep dives. Now, how do we put this into practice? First, recognize the trap. Differentiate between actual, meaningful progression and mere spiritual static. Much of our daily activity is simply spinning our wheels without moving forward. Second, curate your mind. Choose to consume ideas and art that offer permanent wisdom rather than content designed only to agitate your emotions. Finally, practice intentional detachment. Stop demanding lasting security from a physical world that, by its very nature, is incapable of providing it. Nasir Khusrow wrote that the human soul is like a mirror. If you keep it angled downward toward the earth, it will only ever reflect mud. But if you angle it upward, it catches the stars. In a world built to keep you endlessly moving, choosing to be perfectly still is a quiet, profound form of resistance.